Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Ian Kavat. Taiwan is watching closely as Donald Trump prepares to speak with Vladimir Putin about a stop to the fighting in Ukraine. Take a look.
What sort of concessions will you be seeking to have will Putin make to get a deal done?
Well, I think we'll, be talking about land. It's a lot of land. It's a lot different than it was before the wars, And we'll be talking about land. We'll be talking about power plants.
Can Trump secure Putin's agreement to what should be an immediate, unconditional ceasefire? If not, are we about to see Washington turn the screws on Moscow, as it did with Ukraine? From it all, what lessons is China taking and what impact does this have on Taiwan? Joining us today are Jonas Parello-Plesner, Alliance of Democracies Foundation Executive Director and author of The Battle for Taiwan, and Chen Fang-yu, Soochow University Political Science Assistant Professor, and Marcin Jerzewski, European Values Center for Security Policy, Taiwan Office Head. A very warm welcome to all of you on the show today. Our discussion today is really about comparing the treatment of Ukraine and Russia and how this may reflect on any Chinese attack of Taiwan. Following the return of Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff after his meeting with the Russian president in Moscow, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said this on Face the Nation. Watch.
I want everyone to understand, here's the plan. Plan A is get the shooting to stop so that we can move to Plan B, phase 2, which is have everybody at a table, maybe with some shuttle diplomacy, to figure out a way to permanently end this war in a way that's enduring and it respects everybody's needs and so forth. No one is saying that that second part is easy, but we can't get even to that second part until we get past the first part. It's hard to negotiate an enduring end to a war as long as they're shooting at each other.
So, Jonas, we heard that quite clearly, ceasefire, separate to and before the peace agreement. And yet we heard Donald Trump saying that he will speak to Putin about carving up land, power plants, and also the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister, who I know that you're aware of, said, we will demand that ironclad security guarantees become part of this agreement. So, in your view, is Putin, delaying a ceasefire, or does he actually want to skip Plan A, get to Plan B without actually stopping fighting?
Well, Putin started this war, and he also wants to win it in one way or the other. So that's, of course, his kind of ultimate game here. So the fact that Donald Trump has put a peace plan and ceasefire proposal on the table, that, of course, puts him under some pressure. But as we also see in the statement that you talked about from the Deputy Foreign Minister of Russia, talking about ironclad security guarantees, I mean, this is a joke. It's the Russians that attacked Ukraine, so they don't, of course, the Russians don't need ironclad guarantees in this. So I think that he will try to delay, he will try to make maximalist demands. I do hope that Trump will put pressure on him now. I don't feel very certain about it, but it's my hope that at least with this ceasefire, where we were some time back when after the disastrous meeting of Zelensky in the White House, that right now we're in a situation where the Ukrainians, at least the pressure is not directly on them, it's more on Russia. But Russia will do everything it can to delay and to basically also return to the fighting. I mean, we've seen them continue the fighting even after the ceasefire.
It's not return to the fighting, though. It's continue the fighting.
Continue the fighting all the time. Yes, that's way more correct to say it that way.
Professor Chen, so Vladimir Zelensky says it's been a week now since they agreed to this ceasefire. That was meant to be the first step. And every day people are getting killed. So why is it that there seems to be different treatment to Russia? Why is the US allowing Putin to drag this out?
Well, it is always very difficult to make a deal with the dictators, especially when Russians are now advancing in many places, especially in Kursk. So it's very difficult to stop the one side that is winning the war in some places. So that is first. I think Mr. Putin's
but the measures that were used against Ukraine were a cessation of, the military aid as well as information sharing. These are quite very, very hard and heavy and crucial means to do that.
So far, we don't see any pressure on the Russian side. So the globe is now watching on how Mr. Trump is going to deal with Mr. Putin if there's no such pressure. So we already see a lot of very difficult pressures on the Ukraine side. And also, Mr. Trump seems to use these tactics of pushing the Europe to support Ukraine. However, there's no pressure at all on the Russian side. So it's very difficult so far to make Mr. Putin to agree to such an agreement.
Marcin, when does it start looking, okay, so there's going to be a phone call today between Trump and Putin, and we don't know, whether that will actually end up with an agreement on a ceasefire, which is what we understand the Americans want at the very least, in order to then start negotiating a further peace deal. Many believe that Trump has been too hard on Ukraine and too soft on Russia. When does it get to the stage where it starts to look bad on Trump if there is a delay in actually getting to this first stage of ceasefire?
I think that the dynamic that you're describing, with Trump being too hard on Ukraine and too soft on Russia, is already looking bad, for example, in the context of transatlantic relations. So the situation in Ukraine is, of course, the essential security threat for Europe to deal with, and therefore the idea of the US doing a 180 in their policy vis-a-vis Ukraine and Russia is already undermining these dynamics. And I believe that it's really important to understand what Trump is doing and how he is talking about Ukraine and Russia through the lens of domestic politics within the United States. Isolationist tendencies that Trump is perpetuating in American politics are often a direct response to public sentiments in the United States that where the position of Ukraine and the situation in Ukraine is often widely misunderstood, and therefore Ukraine is just easy to villainize for easy political gains at home.
Right. So Jonas, what do we expect then Trump to do if he does need to turn those screws on Putin?
Well, he doesn't, of course, have as many tools as he had with the Ukrainians. Unfortunately, were, of course, the military aid, the intelligence cooperation were things he could turn on and off. So with Putin, it's, of course, harder sanctions. They might, of course, not, even if he threatens with them or announces them, they might not take effect immediately. But those could be some of it, of basically trying to sort of squeeze the Russian economy. I hope that's some of the tools that he would use, but I don't feel certain about it.
Professor Chen, let's talk about credibility. So, does Trump's credibility in Ukraine matter for Taiwan, in Asia for Asian allies?
Well, I think Mr. Trump has a different worldview. So in his view, everything is transactional. So there's no concept as an alliance as usual. So in the past, we all see that by nature that American is the democratic country's allies. So in terms of the national security, almost every country in the world see American as the most closed allies. However, right now, because everything turns into a transactional relationship, so the allies of the Americans will have doubts on whether they should trust on the U.S. on this the Ukraine war. So, for example, there is an internal debate on whether the Five Eyes alliance should continue, because there's the head of the national intelligence in the U.S. is now highly pro-Russia. So yeah, the credibility works in the past, but now it seems to have a reshuffle.
So being Taiwanese in Taiwan, what kind of concessions, that asked of Ukraine would be too much for Taiwan?
Well, it is very difficult to compare Ukraine's situation and Taiwan because the geopolitical conditions are totally different. But for Taiwan, we need to see a very strong the U.S. commitment on the regional peace and regional stability. So I think the U.S. should insist on the regional peace to give more pressure on the Russian
Which region?
side.
The European region,
I mean, yeah,
or the Asian
so
region?
we are watching the situation in the Europe. So we see either in the Europe or in the Indo-Pacific region. In the past, we always see a very strong commitment on the U.S. commitment, especially in the Europe side, it is NATO. And in the Indo-Pacific side, we see the Indo-Pacific strategy and the U.S. relationship with the allies, with Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and the Philippines. And so we hope that this alliance can continue.
Right. Marcin, does some in Taiwan, what they see as Ukraine's deal, what it gets out of this, they do draw some parallels with perhaps a position that Taiwan might be in if China was to attack. How about China? Does it look at how the US has been dealing with Putin and Russia and say the better that Trump treats Putin, then the better it is for Xi Jinping and China?
Absolutely. There are many lessons that China can draw from the current manner in which Washington is trying to resolve the situation in Ukraine. And even though the Trump administration hasn't been in place for all that long, many gifts have been handed to Beijing on a silver platter. And I think that it is absolutely naive to think that security and prosperity of the Euro-Atlantic and Indo-Pacific theaters can be separated, because amid the consolidation of cooperation between Beijing and Moscow with involvement of Pyongyang and Tehran, our theaters are more interconnected than ever. I believe that particularly possible land concessions could be very dangerous for Taiwan. One of the possible scenarios of escalation of cross-strait tensions that is considered by security experts is a replication of salami slicing strategies that Putin's regime has deployed vis-à-vis Ukraine starting in 2014 with the illegal annexation of Crimea. Therefore, what does it mean that we defend Taiwan and Taiwan's resilience? The free area of Taiwan controlled by the Republic of China, Taiwan, includes not only the main island, but also the outlying islands of Jinmen and Mazu, Panghu, and islands in the South China Sea. So I would pay particular attention to possible land concessions and what that could mean for Taiwan.
Right. And Jonas, of course, the US, Washington has said very clearly that it wants to withdraw from Europe so that it can focus on Asia, on countering China. So for you, does Trump necessarily think that, it is a big deal for China, that is, if the message is Russia can invade a different country and alter the international borderlines with impunity?
Well, that's what we will see. I mean, Trump, I think, has a worldview, or in worst case, he has a worldview where he sees it in spheres of interest, and he's willing to do deals with Putin, willing to do deals with Xi Jinping, and kind of carve out the world in that way. I don't kind of hope that. I hope, as Professor Chen was also saying before, that we will still have a system where alliances still hold. We've just seen the G7 declaration on Taiwan and other matters, which was quite strong. So that, of course, also show a U.S. committed still to alliances. But clearly with Trump, we have a very transactional, and we have somebody who is very happy to sit down with dictators. And of course, all allies in Europe, in Asia right now, feel quite uncertain about kind of what are the implications of that worldview. And we'll see when Trump at some point also meets with Xi Jinping for the first time.
And a lot of that uncertainty is over the framing of things, Professor Chen. So after the disastrous Overruled meeting between Zelensky and Trump, the US president said the Ukrainians don't want peace. That was his conclusion. Now, Putin hasn't been characterized yet as not wanting peace, even though it appears that he has not agreed to that immediate unconditional ceasefire that was asked. When it comes to Taiwan and China, there's also this war of words, isn't there, between Taiwan and China? Which side represents peace, which side represents war? And one of the latest comments from the opposition political party, the KMT, is about Lai Ching-te, saying that he is stirring up conflict to advance an independence agenda by referring to China as an adversary. Lai replied to that by saying that he is committed to peace and stability. How can we see that framing is, transfers between these two different theaters? And why is it so difficult to get an agreement on this?
Well, from the dictator's view, that it was try to shape a propaganda to shape the public opinion on blaming the victims. So for Ukraine, if we support for war in a country that is invaded by another foreign country, that is support for self-defense, not support for war. So if we support for self-defense can be equivalent to not want peace, then it's totally wrong. It's totally nonsense. So it's the same in Taiwan. So we see that all of our efforts to strengthen our self-defense capability is to deter China, not to having a war. So war is always not allowed. We just cannot consent on any war in the international law by the dictators or by any countries. We cannot use force to invade others. That is very simple a fact. So still we see that the public opinion warfare is just flipping this kind of concept.
Okay. Now, the recent G7 foreign ministers' statement not only showed unity on measures to impose costs on Russia if a ceasefire is not reached, but also hardened its language on China and threw more support behind Taiwan. Among other things, G7 members, quote, emphasized the importance of maintaining peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. They encouraged the peaceful resolution of cross-strait issues and reiterated their opposition to any unilateral attempts to change the status quo by force or coercion. They also expressed support for Taiwan's meaningful participation in appropriate international organizations, and they remain concerned with China's military buildup and the continued rapid increase in China's nuclear weapons arsenal. Marcin, let me ask you, so also very significantly, of course, for Taiwan is they removed all previous statements, mentions of the one China policy, and China, of course, has reacted badly to this. How significant do you think this move is?
I think that this move also signifies how intangible one China policies of various actors can be. The main reason why it is so important to emphasize that individual actors in the global system can pursue their individual one China policies without necessarily accepting the Chinese definition of its one China principle is that policies are malleable and they can change based on circumstances. And we can name multiple examples of countries adjusting their one China policies, often very quietly, for example, by not applying more rigid operationalizations of one China policies in practice.
But the complete removal of it, Marcin, in these statements, usually there's always one China. Are they sending a signal to Beijing?
Absolutely. So to sum it up, it is significant. It is significant for the reasons which I sought to outline. It is significant because one China policies can mean different things. And I think that the message that the removal of the reference to one China policy sends to Beijing is not only this malleability of one China policies, but also the fact that there is no consent within G7 for China to continue manipulating definitions of one China policy and one China principle, as it has done, for example, by mischaracterizing the contents of UN Resolution 2758.
Jonas, do you think that decision was influenced at all by what's happening in Ukraine?
I think the G7 ministers wanted to come out with a strong message. I also think the American Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who's been a strong supporter of Taiwan, also one of the founding members of IPAC, the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, when he was a senator. I think this is something that also kind of mattered to him. We've also seen previous to that the changes on the State Department's homepage, the way Taiwan is listed as well. So I think he also personally has been kind of pushing for this. And it's of course also in a time when there's so much disunity around Ukraine, it's also nice to kind of that the G7 shows a sort of firm stance against autocracies, in this case against China.
Absolutely. Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin pledged to spare Ukrainian lives in Kursk following an appeal by Trump on Truth Social that, quote, thousands of Ukrainians are completely surrounded, and urging Russia to avoid a, quote, horrible massacre. However, while Kyiv says the situation is challenging in Kursk, it says reports that they are encircled are Russian propaganda. Professor Chen, so what is your reading of the accusation against Trump that he often repeats Russian propaganda?
Well, that is a sad accusation and a sad fact. So we already see that when Mr. Trump accused Mr. Zelensky of starting the war and should have been stop the war 3 years ago, already a win of the Russian propaganda. So we see in Taiwan, we see a lot of pro-China scholars or media also reiterate that it is the smaller countries should not anger the bigger countries. You should not be too close to the US or the European allies and then to irritate the bigger countries. And that Mr. Trump's accusation on Ukraine just verify all of these accusations. So I think it is that to see this, because every word, every rhetoric has its own effect. And we all understand that the US want to withdraw, we want to stop spending too much money on this is totally understandable. However, the rhetorics on the Ukraine is a little bit too much, so that the Russian propaganda can have more resources to spread out, so that they can win the public opinion.
So in your view, why is it that Trump is taking this approach? I mean, like you said, we all understand everybody wants to stop the fighting and the deaths.
We already see some research on how the Russian propaganda target the U.S., the far-right people, or some media, extreme media with extreme ideology, so that they can spread out some of the theories on this. And I think it's not only Russians doing this, but also we see China is also doing this. That is, we want peace, we don't want war, but they never condemn the country that invade others. So it is not only happens in the US, but also in Taiwan. So maybe I think Mr. Trump believes that this is a good tactic to force others, especially European countries, to do more, to put in more efforts on supporting Ukraine. It is successful, but however, the public opinion also matters. Yeah.
Marcin, one of the interesting newest kernels of information, we can call it that, from the White House spokesperson just yesterday, I believe, she talked about the power plants that would be discussed between Putin and Trump, and she said that Zaporizhia would be one of them, and it was on the border with Russia. Can you sort of pick apart that statement for us in terms of the misinformation?
I believe that this reference to the power plants is very consistent with some of the attacks that we have seen both in the information space as well as in the kinetic space since the onset of the full-scale invasion. So it is very much in Russian interest to perpetuate the narratives that such critical infrastructure sites should belong to Russia because they are a part of strength that Ukraine has.
But the location, the particular location was Zaporizhia power plant.
So this is very much connected to the overall argument about land sharing and Russia's failure to acknowledge borders that were drawn after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So I think that it's not only about the geographic location, but also the importance of the power plant as a vehicle of economy and reconstruction. What Trump has advocated is creation of peace through strength. However, in reality, what he is pushing Ukraine to pursue is peace through weakness, peace through acknowledging its own weakness and stripping Ukraine not only of land but also of these critical infrastructure sites is a part of pushing Ukraine into admitting its own alleged weakness.
Jonas, if we could get your view on that comment from the White House spokesperson about Zaporizhia power plant being on the border.
Yeah, I mean, as I think Marcin laid it out pretty well, and of course we're in a situation which we as Europeans that all support. I mean, I have my Ukrainian Liberty uniform on and in Ukrainian colors today, which I have worn since the 3 years of start of war for press and for international kind of conferences. So, I mean, my personal and the foundation I represent support for Ukraine is there totally, and we of course having a situation now where the Americans are going into these strange rabbit holes like this one here.
Does it seem that they have accepted the borders that Russia believes are there?
I don't think you can say that yet, and I don't hope that's the case. So let's keep out before we all the time take the sort of the worst case scenario, because this is very serious, of course, for the Ukrainians and for the repercussions that we've talked about during the show that this could have also out here in East Asia if you have a big autocratic neighbor that's basically allowed to militarily take part of another country's territory. So we've not seen that happen yet. I mean, what's on the table right now is that ceasefire. So I do hope that what will happen is that Trump starts putting a bit more pressure on Russia. Let's see. But it's definitely very concerning. when you see the president of the United States, the president of the sort of the free world that sort of touts facts and numbers that are not correct. We had it as well around Europe and Europe's support to Ukraine, where he consistently gave wrong numbers. President Macron, when he visited the White House, tried to correct him on that. And we've seen him often revert to those incorrect numbers. So we are a little bit both battling, the Ukrainians are battling on the front, and then there's a battle against disinformation and what narrative to tell about this war. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, it's very simple, and we need to sort of continue to state the fact. It's a war of aggression started by Russia 3 years ago against its neighboring countries that violated international borders. The ceasefire, the peace could end in one day, and it's very simple. Russia just withdraws all its soldiers. Then you have both peace and ceasefire. Mm.
Unfortunately, I don't think Washington quite subscribes to that. Professor Chen, very final words to you. We talked about the Chinese propaganda on Taiwan. You can see that we know that Ukraine also had a lot of Russian propaganda and Russian loyalty within its society. However, it seems to have come together to unify during war. What is your interpretation of how Taiwan may fare, and what does it need to do in advance to ensure that it doesn't disintegrate along those division lines?
We already see an ecosystem in the civil society in Taiwan to make more research and also collaborate with each other to defend against such a propaganda war. Especially, I think recently our government also making more efforts on anti-infiltration. So I think it takes a whole of government approach to defend against a future possible aggression.
Let's hope that is the case. Thank you so much to my guests, Jonas Parello-Plesner, Chen Fang-yu and Marcin Jerzewski, for joining Taiwan Talks today.